Hey there, my name is Sage, and today I'm going to be doing a deep dive into the Bard's Cantrip spell list. Let's jump into it. First up, we have Blade Ward. You extend your hand and trace a sigil of warding in the air. Until the end of your next turn, you have resistance against bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt by weapon attacks. So the thing that first pops out to me about Blade Ward is it's very similar to the dodge action. The dodge action gives you a higher chance of not getting hit. Blade Ward gives you resistance to the damage that you're expecting to get hit by. They both have their place, and it's kind of interesting, like, why would you take a full cantrip when you have the dodge action to do very similar things? And I think that's going to be its biggest downfall. It also is taking your action to do something defensive, but that's not always a bad thing. And sometimes if you're retreating or you just need a moment of respite, using this will let you survive that much longer. Overall, I would call it a defensive cantrip. Moving into Friends, it's a concentration spell, and it's for the duration. You have advantage on all charisma checks directed at one creature of your choice that isn't hostile towards you. When the spell ends, the creature realizes that you used magic to influence its mood and becomes hostile towards you. A creature prone to violence might attack you. Another creature might seek retribution in other ways at the DM's discretion, depending on the nature of your interaction with it. Advantage on charisma checks is pretty great. Them hating you at the end is usually pretty bad, but if you are a type of character who changes your face and your voice, you know, you've taken the actor feat and you have disguise self, for example, then you can make them hate anyone pretty easily. So it can be actually a very, very powerful cantrip. It does fit the Bard's flavor. It does take some dancing around to get some really good use out of this. More often than not, if you were just using it at face value, it's not going to be worth a couple of rolls at advantage to have someone want to seek retribution on you, for example. Dancing Lights is concentration, has a range out to 120 feet. You create up to 4 torch-sized lights within range, making them appear as torches, lanterns, or glowing orbs that hover in the air for the duration. You can also combine the 4 lights into one glowing vaguely humanoid form of medium size. Whichever form you choose, each light sheds dim light in a 10-foot radius. As a bonus action on your turn, you can move the lights up to 60 feet to a new spot within range. A light must be within 20 feet of another light created by this spell, and a light winks out if it exceeds the spell's range. So I think the biggest downside to Dancing Lights is it requires concentration. It's a really good spell, otherwise light is very important, but we're competing with the light cantrip, which doesn't require concentration and does mostly the same job. And for that reason, I would recommend light over Dancing Lights. Speaking of light, you touch one object that is no larger than 10 feet in any dimension. Until the spell ends, the object sheds bright light in a 20-foot radius and dim light for an additional 20 feet. The light can be colored as you like. Completely covering the object with something opaque blocks the light. The spell ends if you cast it again or dismiss it as an action. If you target an object held or worn by a hostile creature, that creature must succeed on a dexterity saving throw to avoid the spell. Yep, so just basically a 40-foot radius light as a cantrip. Fantastic. You can cast it on objects and then throw them, so you can like check distances. You can drop it down a well, for example, to see how deep it is. Just having it, to see is pretty fantastic. I really like light. I feel like it is really strong, useful utility, and I recommend it as kind of the go-to light things up spell. Next up is Mage Hand. A spectral floating hand appears at the point you choose within range. The hand lasts for the duration or until you dismiss it as an action. The hand vanishes if it is ever more than 30 feet away from you, or if you cast this spell again. You can use your action to control the hand. You can use the hand to manipulate an object, open an unlocked door or container, stow or retrieve an item from an open container, or pour the contents out of a vial. You can move the hand up to 30 feet each time you use it. The hand can't attack, activate magical items, or carry more than 10 pounds. This is probably my favorite cantrip. I love Mage Hand. Fun for roleplay. It's awesome for utility. Being able to open up trapdoors from far away is useful in and of itself, but you can do so many things with this. Need to get on a wall quietly? Well, hold your grappling hook with the Mage Hand and then set it instead of tossing it where it can make a chink sound, Like I said, it's also really fun for roleplay. Have it playing as a third hand on your stringed instrument to do even crazier music is just a simple example for bards. I had one character who always kept his hand on his sword, and so he always had Mage Hand floating around as his second hand because his other hand was always occupied. So just things like that. It's a very fun, flavorful spell. Really great. Love Mage Hand. Next up is Mending. Mending takes a minute to cast. The spell repairs a single break or tear in an object you touch, such as broken chain link, 2 halves of a broken key, a torn cloak, or a leaking wineskin. As long as the break or tear is no larger than 1 foot in any dimension, you mend it, leaving no trace of the former damage. This spell can physically repair a magic item or construct, but the spell can't restore magic to such an object. I think Mending's pretty neat. It comes up surprisingly often. It's a good utility spell, but it's just outshone by other utility spells such as Mage Hand, Minor Illusion, Prestidigitation, Message, but if those weren't there, this would probably be the standout utility spell. Notable with Bardtures, that you can keep your arrows from ever having to be restored because you can just keep mending them after each combat is a small thing, but it is a thing. Next up is Message. You point your finger towards a creature within range and whisper a message. The target, and only the target, hears the message and can reply in a whisper that only you can hear. You can cast the spell through solid objects if you are familiar with the target and know it is beyond the barrier. Magical silence, 1 foot of stone, 1 inch of common metal, a thin sheet of lead, or 3 feet of wood blocks the spell. The spell doesn't have to follow a straight line and can travel freely around corners or through openings. Message is amazing. Not only is it amazing as a communicate with someone you can't see, it's also amazing for when you're in a roleplay situation at a dinner. You can still, cover your mouth and talk to people as if you were having a conversation and nobody else is hearing you. This just has a ton of utility. It's especially good on skill-based classes who may be going off and doing things on their own and then they need to relay information back to the party, so scouts or faces can get a lot of advantage out of Message, and bards can do either of those roles. And since bards are so useful out of combat, Message is basically a must-take in my mind. Next up is Minor Illusion. You create a sound or an image of an object within range that lasts for the duration. The illusion also ends if you dismiss it as an action or cast the spell again. If you create a sound, its volume can range from a whisper to a scream. It can be your voice, someone else's voice, a lion's roar, a beating of drums, or any other sound you choose. The sound continues unabated throughout the duration, or you can make discrete sounds at different times before the spell ends. If you create an image of an object such as a chair, muddy footprints, or a small chest, it must be no larger than a 5-foot cube. The image can't create sound, light, smell, or any other sensory effect. Physical interaction with the image reveals it to be an illusion because things can pass through it. If a creature uses its action to examine the sound or image, the creature can determine that it is an illusion with a successful intelligence investigation check against your spell save DC. If a creature discerns the illusion for what it is, the illusion becomes faint to the creature. There are a lot of things you can do with Minor Illusion. It has combat application, utility application. Combining it with silent image, you can do sounds and imagery, almost creating a greater image from scratch, because Minor Illusion notably doesn't take your concentration. Good for fooling people. There's just so many things you can do with it. In combat, you can obscure vision to get free disengages for your allies, to potentially set up opportunity attacks. There's all sorts of things you can do with it. This is definitely on the higher end of what you can pull off with your utility spells. Next up is Prestidigitation. This spell is a minor magical trick that novice spellcasters use for practice. You create one of the following magical effects within range. You create an instantaneous, harmless sensory effect such as a shower of sparks, a puff of wind, faint musical notes, or an odd odor. You instantaneously light or snuff out a candle, a torch, or a small campfire. You instantaneously clean or soil an object no larger than 1 cubic foot. You chill, warm, or flavor up to 1 cubic foot of non-living material for 1 hour. You make a color, a small mark, or a symbol appear on an object or a surface for 1 hour. You create a non-magical trinket or an illusionary image that can fit into your hand and that lasts until the end of your next turn. If you cast the spell multiple times, you can have up to 3 of its non-instantaneous effects active at a time, and you can dismiss such an effect as an action. So Prestidigitation is a workhorse of a cantrip, and it's a really good, make your character feel more magical type cantrip. I like putting this on, say, an arcane archer who doesn't necessarily have a lot of magic behind them. That does make them feel like they do have some. It's one of my favorite role-playing cantrips. I had a character who loved to make water and then would flavor it, color it, and change its temperature to make very specific drinks like hot chocolate or tea or whatever, just by using Prestidigitation. It also is fun with the clean freak, someone who really wants all their stuff clean. Prestidigitation can be pretty great with them. It also has a surprisingly lot of utility applications, being able to put little symbols on things, being able to show somebody an image, hey, this is the person we're looking for, all sorts of things, and you'd be surprised at how often it kind of pops up throughout a campaign. Another really strong utility application cantrip. Next up we get Thunderclap, our first damaging cantrip. The range is within 5 feet of us, and we create a burst of thunderous sound, which can be heard 100 feet away. Each creature other than you within 5 feet of you must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 1d6 thunder damage. Boy, this cantrip has some problems. First is targeting Constitution, which is a very difficult saving throw to target because many creatures are very good at Constitution. Second is it's really loud. If we're ever trying to be quiet, this is the worst cantrip we can use. Third, it puts us in close combat with our enemies, which is probably the worst place for a bard to be, especially at early levels. That's not where we want to be. We are too squishy for that. Finally, the d6 of damage is under average, so we're not even doing good damage once we're up there. The only time this really stands out is if we're hitting multiple enemies within 5 feet of us. Next up is True Strike. You extend your hand and point a finger at a target in range. Your magic grants you a brief insight into the target's defenses. On your next turn, you gain advantage on your first attack roll against the target, provided that this spell hasn't ended its concentration up to 1 round. There are so many problems with this cantrip. It's really sad. Takes our concentration. Even once we use it, we don't get advantage on this turn. We have to wait until our first attack next turn. If we were sneaking and they don't see us and we're able to cast this to set up advantage, we already had advantage. This really just simply doesn't have the application that we're looking for. It doesn't do what it set it out to do, which is to set up one really good attack. It doesn't even do that well. Yeah, so True Strike is commonly seen as probably the worst cantrip in the game, and for good reason. It's poorly designed.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would, but I legally can't.
Last but not least, we have Vicious Mockery, which is the Bard's signature attack cantrip. We have a range of 60 feet. So that is our range as a standard damage dealer as a bard. You unleash a string of insults laced with subtle enchantments at a creature you can see within range. If the target can hear you, though it need not understand you, it must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or take 1d4 psychic damage and have disadvantage on the next attack roll it makes before the end of its turn. So Vicious Mockery actually comes on fairly strong because that disadvantage is pretty good. Most creatures in the early levels are only going to have 1 attack, so you nerf their 1 attack. So you're using your action to both damage them and kind of ruin one of their actions, which is pretty good. It does fall off, however, because once they get multi-attack and once multiple attacks or multiple enemies start becoming more of a thing, it just doesn't do as good. It's not nerfing them as hard. And the main problem is that we're doing so little damage. The best thing about Vicious Mockery is easily that you can tell someone that you don't like their haircut and they can fall over dead. And it has a lot of good memes and funny humor that the bard brings to the table, and it's a great cantrip for that reason alone. But if we're talking about pure optimization, this cantrip is not a super great damaging cantrip, and you will take note that bards don't have a super great damaging cantrip, and bards don't get a ton of weapons either, so it puts the bards in this, like, what do they do with their basic action? You know, they've casted spells already, now what do they do? And that's really a big question for bards. Some answers will be Vicious Mockery, some will be shoot up, hand crossbow, but if you can bring answers from other classes, notably the Tiefling brings you charisma-based cantrips that can help you out. They can give you things like Firebolt or Frost Ray, you know, things like that, which can become your main damaging cantrip. It can make you feel more like a spellcaster. Another option is to find weapon proficiencies, though unless you're one of the 2 martial bards, you'll never get the extra attack, so those will eventually fall off while cantrips will keep getting better. So I'd say for the standard bard, you're really looking for a cantrip from your race. So Tieflings genuinely stand out as a big thing for bards, but of course, we're going to be flexible enough to take anything. So let's pretend that we don't take Tiefling. Let's pretend that we're not trying to cover our bases with our damage. Well, then we're relying on Vicious Mockery and or a hand crossbow for ranged damage. The hand crossbow is going to do more damage at early levels, and the Vicious Mockery is eventually going to do more damage, but it also comes with a debuff. So we're probably going to lean into Vicious Mockery more than we would the hand crossbow, but it's probably good to take both if you're playing just a straight bard. Anyways, that is my take on the Bard's cantrips. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if I missed anything or if there's some applications for things that I missed. Let me know in the comments down below. We are D&D Daily. We release new D&D content every single day. If that's interesting to you, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you tomorrow. Later.